Phil is representing the UNAC, the United Nations Anti-War Coalition, which is organizing, as I mentioned, just the time when he entered, it was by chance, the same moment when he entered the hall, which is organizing together with other peace forces, amongst them the US Peace Council, our prestigious member of the World Peace Council and our secretariat, big demonstration, and he will speak about that, I'm sure, in New York on the 9th of July, correct?
That's correct.
So Phil, you have the floor.
And thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation to speak today. I don't do nearly as much traveling as it looks by what happened this year at the social forum in Warsaw, and also I went to Odessa in Ukraine for the memorial on May 2nd for the Odessa, the victims of the House of Trade Unions fire. It's difficult to try to say what I would like to say in just a few minutes. All of the speakers have the same problem, but there are some things that are pressing on my mind a great deal. One of them doesn't have to do with Europe. It has to do with police shootings that have just taken place in the United States, in Dallas, Texas, and in Pennsylvania. We have an epidemic of murders of young black people by police officers. And our organization, the United National Anti-War Coalition, is trying to address both the wars abroad and the wars at home, the poverty, the racism, sexism, the homophobia, the attacks on people's standard of living, the anxiety that is facing working people across the United States that is moving in two directions, one to the right, with the support for a presidential candidate like Donald Trump, who's the closest that we've had to a fascist contender for the presidency in many years, and the other to the left, to Bernie Sanders, who is raising the question of economic inequality, although he never discusses U.S. imperialism. So things are happening in the United States, and they're moving rapidly. And we are trying to get the attention of the American public, and particularly the working class and the communities of color, that their struggle is intimately tied up with the struggle of all people around the world. I had the opportunity in March to travel to Warsaw with my wife, Anna Edwards. We live in Richmond, Virginia, where we do a lot of work trying to reclaim black history, because Richmond was the center of the U.S. domestic slave trade, something that the city government has ignored for 150 years and is only now beginning to come to grips with. And when after we left the conference in Warsaw, we took a train ride down to Krakow. We wanted to go visit the Auschwitz concentration camp museum. And along the train ride, I was struck by how many buildings we passed that looked like they were factories, but they were abandoned, and the windows were broken and doors were torn off. And I said, wow, they must have had a terrible time in the recession of 2007 and 2008. And then I remembered things I had heard at the Social Forum conference, and I realized that this deindustrialization of Poland was a direct result of the demands of the International Monetary Fund. That after the transformation, the goal of the Western capitalist countries was to reduce Central and Eastern and Southern Europe to the level of neo-colonies. And it was a combination of the demands by the IMF for privatization, deregulation of industry, selling off of state resources, cutting back on social services, cutting back on state pensions, elimination of the socialist benefits for education and healthcare that were responsible for the increasing poverty and anxiety in this section of Europe. Today, I am gaining a little better understanding, not nearly as much as all of you, of course, but a little bit more about how this process of the recolonization of Eastern and Southern Europe goes hand in hand with the militarization of Eastern and Southern Europe, and how the former socialist countries that were part of the USSR are being recruited into NATO. So as the standard of living for working people is reduced, the militarization is increased, and it's an eastward journey. It goes closer and closer and closer to the borders of Russia. And when Russia takes a defensive measure, the West says, well, you see how aggressive they are. We have to move even closer. Now, And someone on Facebook the other day wrote a comment, what right does Russia have to put its country right next to our NATO military exercises? So it's trying to get this across to the American people who are bombarded every day that Russia is the aggressor, Russia is the enemy. Some people don't even know that it's not called the Soviet Union anymore. There's no attention being paid in the country on international issues, which is not their fault, because that material is being overwhelmed by entertainment and sports, and a president who hasn't told the truth about his international policies in 8 years, and a socialist candidate who would rather talk about economic inequality than anything that goes on in the world that he has voted for and should be held accountable for. At the social forum, we met with a group from Odessa, Ukraine, called the Council of Mothers of May 2. Now you may know this is the organization of relatives of the 46 people or more who were murdered in a fascist-led attack on the House of Trade Unions in Kulikovo Square on May 2, 2014. It was a terrible massacre. I've been told it's one of the worst examples of civic violence in Europe since World War II. And the family members have asked for an investigation. They actually know who's responsible because the whole massacre, the attack on the trade union's building, was videotaped. It was posted on YouTube. People have said, oh, that's so-and-so shooting the gun. That's so-and-so throwing a Molotov cocktail. That's so-and-so clubbing someone to death. I know that person, identify them. But the Ukrainian government refuses to cooperate with any international investigation because it's working with these fascist organizations. Now in the United States, we call Donald Trump a fascist, we call Hillary Clinton a fascist, we call the guy down the street who won't cut his grass, he's a fascist. Well, we don't have any idea what real fascism is. I saw it when I went to Odessa. The right sector groups, the Bandera, the Brotherhood, the Azov Battalion, actual organizations well funded by oligarchs who model themselves after the Nazi party, including the patches of military units of the SS. It's the real thing. And we've been involved in supporting the mothers, the Council of Mothers for May 2 since the social forum. We formed an organization called the Odessa Solidarity Campaign. And we're promoting a petition that the Mothers Council has for an international investigation. Now there are many problems in the world. There are many people under attack. There are many massacres that take place on every continent. But I think in addition to the humanitarian reasons for supporting this brave group of people, is the fact that they are standing up against fascism in Ukraine, which has increasingly become a battlefield in the struggle between the United States and Russia. A non-violent movement, they're unarmed, standing up against actual fascist organizations that confront them in the streets and have murdered their sons and daughters. So I'm come up here to Warsaw to speak at 2 conferences about this issue and Ukraine, and to appeal for your help, both on a humanitarian basis, but also because it supports a whole city that still values its designation as the hero city of one of the 4 hero cities of the Soviet Union for standing up against Nazi occupation, and are now struggling with the descendants of those collaborators of the Nazi organization in their own city. So I have literature in the back that I'd like to make available to you about the Mothers Council, about UNAC, about recent examples of repression in Odessa, and about some of the things that we're doing here in the United States. We'll be meeting a little later after this conference to discuss ways that the World Peace Council and the United National Anti-War Coalition can cooperate more closely in the future. I would like to say that in addition to the demonstration that will take place tomorrow in New York City, there also will be anti-NATO demonstrations in San Francisco, San Diego, Los Angeles, Minneapolis, and we think in Washington, D.C., as well as Vancouver in British Columbia in Canada. And most of those demonstrations are being co-sponsored by the U.S. Peace Council and our organization and several others. So there is cooperation that's already in place. And my personal opinion is that there isn't any organization that is strong enough to stop the drive towards war and repression and racism. and that we had better learn to talk together and find something that we can agree on, so that we can put up the greatest possible resistance to war, to fascism, and to racism. And I appreciate so much the opportunity to come here and say that. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.